Hey everyone, it's Mr. Midnight. Tonight I have 8 new most disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories. These are real stories from workers who went to tiny Alaska towns for jobs. Just regular people, janitors, mail carriers, store clerks. These towns only have a few thousand people and you can't drive there. Only planes or boats can reach them. In winter it's dark all day and deadly cold. These workers thought they were just taking normal jobs that paid well, but they found out something was very wrong in these places. I got these stories from their final reports and messages. If you're new, subscribe for more true scary stories every night. Hit the bell too. Turn off your lights. These 8 people took regular jobs in Alaska's smallest towns. But when you're that far from help, in places nobody visits, bad things can happen. And once you start the job, you might not be able to leave. Let's begin. My name is Brad Miller, and I've been doing janitorial work for 8 years now. Started right after high school when I couldn't afford college. I've cleaned hospitals, office buildings, even a morgue once. You see some weird stuff working nights. People leave behind more than just trash when they think nobody's watching. But what happened during my 3 weeks at the Petersburg cannery changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible in this world. Some places aren't just haunted, they're hungry. I moved to Petersburg, Alaska in October 2023. It's a tiny fishing town, maybe 3,000 people if you count the seasonal workers. They call it Little Norway because half the families came over from Scandinavia generations ago. The whole place smells like fish and diesel fuel, but it's honest work and the pay is decent if you can handle the isolation. The job posting was simple. Night janitor at Rasmussen Cannery, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., $18 an hour. The building's been there since 1912, still running the same processing lines as my great-grandfather's time. Old brick walls, wooden floors worn smooth by a century of boots, and machinery that should have been replaced decades ago, but somehow keeps chugging along. My supervisor was this old Norwegian guy named Sven Eriksson. Been with the company 43 years, knew every pipe and bolt in the place. First night, he walked me through the routine: mop the processing floor, clean the cutting stations, sanitize the conveyors, empty the trash, check the drains. Simple enough. Just remember, Sven said as we stood in the main processing area, don't look down the drains. Just mop around them, empty the buckets, move on. Trust me on this one, Brad. I figured it was some safety thing, maybe sharp metal or dangerous chemicals. The floor drains were old cast iron, about a foot across, scattered throughout the processing area. They bubbled constantly, like something was breathing down there. Sven said it was normal. Old building, weird plumbing, happens all the time. The first thing that struck me was how clean everything was. I mean, spotless. The day shift processed thousands of pounds of salmon, but by the time I showed up, you'd think the machines had never been used. No blood, no scales, no fish guts anywhere. Even the smell was wrong. Should have reeked of dead fish, but it just smelled like emptiness. In the supply closet, I found cleaning products from the 1950s. Labels faded, but the chemicals were still strong enough to burn your eyes. There was this logbook tucked behind the Lysol, handwritten entries dating back decades. Night custodian of 47, hired October 15th, lasted 3 weeks. Below that, night custodian number 46, hired September 20th, lasted 2 weeks. The list went on and on. 47 names, all short-term employees. I was number 48. The first 2 nights went fine. Strange, but fine. I'd mop around those bubbling drains, clean equipment that was already clean, and count the hours until dawn. The building made noises at night. Old places do that. Settling wood, metal expanding and contracting, pipes gurgling. Nothing I hadn't heard before. But on the 3rd night, I dropped my keys down one of the drains. I had to look. Couldn't afford to lose those keys. They opened the building, the supply closets, everything. I shined my flashlight down the drain, expecting to see maybe 6 feet of pipe before it bent away. Instead, the light kept going and going, like the drain had no bottom. But that's not the weird part. At the very edge of my flashlight's range, I could see light coming from somewhere below. Not electric light, something older, like oil lamps or candles. And I could hear machinery running down there, different machinery than upstairs, slower, rhythmic, like breathing. I used the grabber tool from the supply closet to fish out my keys. When I pulled them up, there were extras, old brass keys I'd never seen before, rusted and worn smooth. They were still on my ring, like they'd always been there. Curiosity killed the cat, but I was still alive. I tried those keys on doors I'd never noticed before. Behind the main processing line, there was a door painted the same color as the wall. One of the old keys fit perfectly. The room behind it was impossible. Another processing line, identical to the main floor, but running backwards. Fish parts were moving up the conveyor belt, assembling themselves into whole salmon. The reassembled fish were alive, swimming through the air like it was water, moving through the walls back toward the ocean. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, watching dead fish put themselves back together. Every logical part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be happening. But there it was, right in front of me. I found another door, another key fit. This room had workers in it, dozens of them, from different time periods, all working at once. Men in 1920s overalls, women in 1960s hairnets, guys in modern uniforms. They couldn't see each other, just worked through each other like ghosts, occupying the same space, but in different times. The drain bubbling got worse after that. The water, if it was water, started overflowing. Too thick, too dark, moving against gravity. It crept up the walls and formed temporary shapes, hands, faces, things that almost looked human, but weren't quite right. Behind the supply closet, I found a service ladder leading down through the floor. The building blueprints didn't show any basement, but there it was. I climbed down into what I can only call the lower cannery. Everything was identical to upstairs, but reversed. Left was right. All the text was backwards. Even the workers moved in reverse, walking backwards, talking backwards, living their entire shifts in rewind. The machinery ran backwards too, uncanning fish, removing labels, reforming the create. Tours, piece by piece. But these fish weren't normal. Too many eyes, human teeth, fingers instead of fins, things that had never swum in any ocean. That's when I understood. The upper cannery canned fish. The lower cannery uncanned them. An endless cycle connected by the drain system, circulating the same biomass up and down forever. Nothing ever really died. Nothing was ever really created. Just transformed, processed, reprocessed. I found employee records down there. Same names repeated every generation. Same faces and photographs spanning decades. The Ericksons had been working here since 1912. The Andersons since 1924. The Millers, my family, since 1961. We weren't employees. We were part of the machine. The smell from the drains was getting stronger every night. Rotting fish mixed with something alive, something aware. I started feeling weak during my shifts, dizzy, like I was fading somehow. One night, I looked in the bathroom mirror and could see right through myself. The machines were processing me. Not all at once, gradually, bit by bit, dissolving me into the same dark liquid that bubbled up from the drains. By the fifth night, I only existed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. During the day, I just wasn't. Nowhere. Nothing. Reformed each night to clean, dissolved again at dawn. I tried to quit, but you can't quit when you only exist 8 hours a day. During business hours, when the office was open, I didn't exist to hand in my resignation. I was already too processed. The whole town operates this way. Day people and night people, never fully real. The cannery is the heart, pumping existence through the drain system like blood, rationing reality to keep everyone functioning just enough to do their jobs. I learned what happened to the night custodians who quit after a few weeks. They didn't quit. They got fully processed, became permanent fixtures in the building's infrastructure. Sven wasn't just an old employee. His consciousness was spread through the concrete foundation, aware but unable to move or die. He could still talk because his voice was built into the building itself. The fish we canned weren't fish. They were fragments of people, memories made flesh. Every can of Petersburg salmon contained someone's dreams, fears, hopes, compressed and sealed. The labels don't lie. It really is wild-caught. Wild-caught human experience, processed and shipped to grocery stores across the country. One night, the upper machinery turned on by itself. No fish on the belts, but it was processing something. Shadows. Dark shapes being cut, cleaned, canned like fish. The labels read, Premium Darkness, Wild-Caught Void, Sustainably Sourced Nothing. These cans disappeared by morning, shipped somewhere else, but no shipping records existed. The backwards cannery below was trying to rebuild us from the cans, but it always got the reconstruction wrong. Too many eyes, human teeth, fingers instead of fins. We were being recycled imperfectly, generation after generation, getting a little more wrong each time. I found the main drain in the basement, a massive chamber where all of Petersburg's drains connected. The town's dissolved residents, a soup of consciousness and memory, circulated through pipes beneath our feet. Every sink, every shower, every toilet connected to this central processing system. The night I discovered the main chamber, I also found the truth about the town itself. Petersburg isn't just a fishing village, it's a processing plant. The fish industry is just the cover story. What we really harvest is human essence, packaged and distributed to, I don't know where. Somewhere that needs what we used to be. I've been cleaning this cannery for 3 weeks now. Every night, the same routine. Mop around the drains, clean equipment that cleans itself, exist just enough to maintain the illusion. The morning dissolves me, the evening rebuilds me, always a little less than before. If you've ever eaten Petersburg Psalms, you've tasted us. We're in every can. The fishermen who caught us, the processors who cleaned us, the night janitors who maintained the system. All of us dissolved and reformed and canned and shipped. Sometimes I see new employees during my shift. Day workers who stay late, security guards, other night staff. I want to warn them, but words just come out as bubbles, floating up to join the processing system. Soon they'll be like me, part-time people, existing just enough to keep the machines running. The drains are bubbling louder tonight. Something big is being processed. Maybe the whole town finally. Maybe the last of the real people being dissolved into the system. Soon there'll be nothing left but the cannery, running on its own, processing shadows into darkness, shipping emptiness to the world above. Don't trust the labels. We're the catch. We're what's being canned. And if you've tasted us, part of you is already dissolving, already becoming part of the system, already starting to exist only part-time. The 6 a.m. whistle is about to blow. Time for me to dissolve again until tonight. Time to become nothing until the cannery needs me to exist. Just remember, don't look in the drains. Don't drop your keys. Don't use the extra keys you find. And whatever you do, don't eat the salmon. We're still in there, still aware, still trying to warn you from inside the cans. But you probably won't listen. Nobody ever does. That's how the cannery keeps running. That's how it keeps processing. That's how we all end up dissolved, canned, and shipped away from ourselves forever. The whistle's blowing now. Time to go. Time to become nothing again. See you tonight, if there's still enough of me left to see anything at all. My name is Patricia Martinez, and I've been a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 4 years now. I started working regular routes in Anchorage, delivering to neighborhoods where the biggest challenge was icy sidewalks and the occasional aggressive dog. I thought I understood what postal work meant, bringing people their letters, packages, and medicine, connecting families across distances. But when I transferred to Bethel, Alaska in January 2022, I learned that some mail routes go places that shouldn't exist. Bethel sits in the middle of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, home to about 6,300 people. It's the hub for dozens of tiny villages scattered across the tundra. There are no roads connecting us to anywhere else. Everything comes and goes by plane or boat. My job was simple: sort packages at the main post office, load them onto small aircraft, and fly with bush pilots to deliver mail to 56 surrounding villages. Most of these places have fewer than 100 people living there. The pay was good, better than my Anchorage route, and I liked the idea of helping isolated communities get their medicine, food, and letters from family. These villages depend on us completely. Without mail delivery, they'd be cut off from the world. My first month was exactly what I expected. I'd arrive at the post office at 6 in the morning, scan packages into our tracking system, organize them by destination, and load them into cargo areas of Cessnas and Piper Cubs. The pilots knew every village by heart: Napaskiak, Akiak, Tuluksak, places with names I had to practice pronouncing. We'd fly low over endless white tundra, land on frozen rivers or tiny airstrips, deliver the mail, and fly back. It was routine work, peaceful even. Then I started noticing packages addressed to villages that weren't on any map. The first time I saw one, I thought it was a mistake. The OT address read Kusilvak Shadows, Alaska in neat handwriting. I'd never heard of it, and it wasn't on my delivery list. When I asked my supervisor about it, she just shrugged and said some villages had old names or unofficial settlements. Randy will know where it goes, she told me, pointing to one of our most experienced pilots. Randy Martinez, no relation despite the name, had been flying mail routes in Alaska for 23 years. He was a quiet guy with weathered hands and eyes that had seen everything the wilderness could throw at him. When I showed him the package, he nodded and took it without explanation. "Load these in the special section," he said, pointing to a separate area of the cargo hold. "I handle those deliveries myself." Over the next few weeks, more packages appeared with similar addresses: Nunavak Void, Timeline Junction, north of Forgotten Creek. The return addresses looked normal: Amazon warehouses, stores in Anchorage, families from the lower 48. But the recipient names were strange. The Keeper of Kusilvak, Void Walker number 7, Timeline Mender. What bothered me most was the weight. Every single one of these mysterious packages weighed exactly 17 pounds. It didn't matter if it was a shoebox or something the size of a small refrigerator. When I lifted it onto the scale, the digital display always read 17.0 lbs. I started checking the tracking numbers, but they didn't exist in our system. These packages were invisible to the USPS database. Randy wouldn't talk about them. Whenever I asked, he'd just say it was part of an old agreement and change the subject. But I could see him getting tense every time we loaded the special packages. His jaw would clench, and he'd double-check our fuel levels like he was preparing for a much longer flight than usual. On February 15th, I convinced Randy to let me ride along on one of his special Delive rides. I told him I needed to learn all the routes in case I had to substitute for him someday. He didn't look happy about it, but he agreed. We loaded 8 regular packages for Akiachak and 3 special packages bound for places I'd never heard of. Randy performed his usual pre-flight inspection, but I noticed him checking systems twice. He seemed nervous, which wasn't like him at all. We took off at 10 in the morning under overcast skies. The flight to Akiachak took 40 minutes over familiar territory: frozen rivers, scattered buildings, the occasional dog team. We delivered the regular mail without incident, refueled, and then Randy turned the plane north. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked through the headset. "You'll see," was all he said. We flew north over empty tundra for over an hour. I kept checking our GPS, but we were heading into areas marked as uninhabited wilderness. No villages, no airstrips, no landmarks of any kind, just endless white snow stretching to the horizon. "Randy, there's nothing out here," I said, starting to worry about our fuel consumption. "There will be," he replied, and started descending. I looked down and saw absolutely nothing. No buildings, no people, no sign of human presence anywhere. We were descending toward flat, empty tundra that stretched for miles in every direction. Then, as we got closer to the ground, structures began to appear. Not like they were hidden by snow or camouflaged. They literally materialized as we descended. First, a few small buildings flickered into view like a television tuning into a channel. Then more appeared, until I could see an entire village laid out below us, complete with houses, storage buildings, and what looked like a community center. But something was wrong with the architecture. The buildings were too tall for an Alaskan village, stretching upward at angles that hurt to look at directly. The roofs didn't sit right on the walls, and the windows were positioned in ways that made no geometric sense. It was like someone had built a village from memory but gotten all the proportions wrong. Randy landed on what appeared to be a packed snow runway, though I hadn't seen it until we were almost touching down. As soon as we came to a stop, people began walking toward the plane. From a distance, they looked normal. Men and women in parkas and winter boots, just like you'd see in any Alaska village. But as they got closer, I realized something was off about their faces. They were too symmetrical, too perfect. Every feature was exactly where it should be, but somehow that made them look completely wrong. All of them were the exact same height. All of them walked in perfect synchronization. When one turned their head to look at something, they all turned their heads at exactly the same moment, like they were sharing one mind. "Don't stare," Randy whispered. "Just help me unload." The villagers, if that's what they were, approached the plane in a perfect line. They didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge us as individuals. They simply took the packages Randy handed them, signed receipts with identical handwriting, and walked away in formation. In return, they loaded packages into our plane. Same size variety, same perfect 17-pound weight for each one. The return addresses were for real villages I knew: Bethel, Akiachak, Napaskiak. But when I glanced at the recipient names, they were people I recognized. Martha Thompson from the post office, Joe Bright from the weather station, Sarah Wilson from the clinic. "Randy," I whispered, "these are going to people we know." "Don't open them," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Don't scan them, just deliver them. It's part of the agreement." We finished loading in complete silence. The villagers stood in a perfect line, watching us with their too perfect faces. Not one of them moved or spoke until we were back in the plane and taxiing for takeoff. As we climbed into the sky, I looked back at the village. It was already fading, becoming transparent until it disappeared completely. By the time we reached our cruising altitude, there was nothing below us but empty tundra. Again, "What the hell was that place?" I asked. Randy was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Somewhere that isn't supposed to exist, but it does, and we have to keep it that way." When we got back to Bethel, I couldn't resist checking one of the return packages. I scanned it into our system while Randy was in the bathroom. The tracking number came up, but the delivery date showed 50 years ago. The recipient, according to our computer, had received this exact package in 1972. I scanned another one. The system showed a delivery date of 2077 to someone who hadn't been born yet, at an address that didn't exist. That night, I took one of the smaller packages home. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I had to know what was inside something that weighed 17 pounds but could fit in a shoebox. I opened it carefully with a box cutter. Inside there was nothing visible, just empty space. But when I reached inside, my hand touched something with weight and substance, even though I couldn't see anything there. The nothing, I don't know how else to describe it, started spreading up my arm. Not cold, not warm, just absent. As it climbed toward my shoulder, I started seeing things. Visions of places that existed between other places. Empty spaces in the world where things that shouldn't be could hide and wait. I saw the truth about those villages. They exist in the spaces between our reality and somewhere else. The post office has been keeping them separate for decades, using the mail route as a barrier. If we stop delivering to them, they merge with our world, replacing real villages, real people. The 17 pounds isn't random. It's the exact weight needed to anchor them in their dimension, to keep them from drifting into ours. I jerked my hand out of the package and the feeling stopped, but the knowledge remained. We weren't just delivering mail to isolated villages. We were feeding something that should stay hungry. Over the next few weeks, I started recognizing names on the packages going to regular villages, people who'd gone missing over the years, presumed dead in the wilderness. They were living in the between villages, and they were ordering things from our world. Each package delivered to them pulled them slightly closer to our reality. By March, the special deliveries had doubled. We were taking 60 packages daily to places that didn't exist, and real villages started reporting strange visitors. People walking out of the tundra, claiming to be relatives, but looking wrong. Too young or too old, features blurred like an old photograph. An elder in a Kiachak pulled me aside during a delivery. "The old agreement is breaking," he said. "They want to trade places with us." I found a manifest from 1971 in the post office files. The first special delivery, dated the same year as an underground nuclear test in the area. The test didn't create a crater. It punched a hole between dimensions, and things leaked through. The Postal Service made a deal. We deliver to them, they stay in their dimension, everyone stays safe. But we weren't just delivering packages. Each delivery traded a small piece of our reality for a piece of theirs. Bethel started changing. Buildings appeared overnight that I could swear weren't there the day before. Streets that led nowhere. People who looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd met them. The nowhere villages were overlapping with real ones, a gradual invasion disguised as a mail route. On April 1st, I showed up for work and found a different building. Same address, but the interior was laid out wrong. My coworkers were people I didn't recognize, but they knew my name, knew my history, acted like we'd worked together for years. They showed me photos from company parties I'd never attended, but there I was in the pictures, smiling next to people I'd never met. The nowhere villages had partially merged with ours, creating false history, false memories, false people. The real Patricia Martinez was somewhere in the between space, and I was her replacement from nowhere, but somehow I remembered being real. Randy was gone, replaced by a pilot who looked identical, but spoke backwards, unless he concentrated hard on forming words correctly. He pretended not to notice when he said things like, "morning good," instead of "good morning." Packages started arriving addressed to me at addresses I'd never lived at, from people I'd never met. When I opened them, they contained pieces of my life from another dimension. Photographs of me as a child in places I'd never been. Letters from family members I didn't have. Personal belongings I'd never owned, but somehow recognized. I realized that everyone in Bethel was being slowly replaced, package by package, delivery by delivery. The post office wasn't delivering mail anymore. It was delivering replacements for all of us. I'm still working the routes. I can't stop. Something compels me to keep loading those planes, to keep flying to places that shouldn't exist. But I don't know if I'm the real Patricia Martinez or the replacement. The packages keep coming, reality keeps shifting, and Bethel isn't Bethel anymore. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the real town in reflections in windows or in photographs that change when I'm not looking at them directly. The real people are still there somewhere, in the between space, probably wondering why their mail carrier looks like someone they used to know but can't quite remember. If you ever take a job with the Postal Service in a remote area, pay attention to packages that don't scan into the system. Check the weights carefully. And if you find yourself delivering to places that aren't on any map, don't ask questions. Don't look too closely at the recipients, because some agreements are too old and too dangerous to break, even when you realize you might not be real enough to make that choice anymore. The mail must go through, even when it's delivering pieces of reality to places that shouldn't exist, even when the return address is somewhere you used to be real. My name is Lisa Rodriguez, and I've been working retail for 4 years now. Started at Target in Seattle right out of high school, then moved to a Walmart in Spokane before ending up here. I've dealt with angry customers, shoplifters, and even a robbery attempt. I thought I'd seen everything retail could throw at me. But what happened during my night shifts at AC Value Center in Sitka, Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about the places we work. Sometimes the real horror isn't the customers, it's the store itself. I'm 22, and I moved to Sitka in October 2024 because my boyfriend got a job on a fishing boat. Sitka's weird. It's on Baranof Island, about 8,500 people, and it rains maybe 300 days a year. Everything comes in by barge because there's no roads connecting us to anywhere else. It's beautiful but isolated in a way that gets to you after a while. AC Value Center was hiring, and they offered me the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Extra $4 an hour hazard pay, they called it. I figured hazard pay meant dealing with drunk fishermen buying chips at 3 a.m., not whatever came later. The store was the only 24-hour place in town, an old building from 1974 with those buzzing fluorescent lights that never shut up. Perfect job for an introvert like me. Empty store, no customers to deal with, just mop floors and stock shelves. My manager Beth was this tired-looking woman in her 50s who'd been there since the store opened. She gave me the basic rundown: restock from the delivery pallets, clean the floors, help the occasional customer, and call her if anything major happened. The first week was peaceful. I'd put in my earbuds, stock toilet paper and canned goods, help the random drunk guy find his favorite brand of chips. The work was easy, the pay was decent for Sitka, and I liked being alone with my thoughts. Then, Wednesday of my second week, I found products on the shelves I hadn't stocked. At first, I thought maybe the day shift had put out some returns or Beth had come in early to stock something special. But these weren't returns. They were brand new items, still had the shipping plastic on them. The weird thing was, they were almost right, but not quite. Instead of Pepsi, there were cans of something called Crest Cola. Same red and blue logo style, but the can was dark green. I tried one. It tasted like Pepsi mixed with pine needles, which was gross but not dangerous. The barcode scanned fine, the price was normal, but I'd never heard of Crest Cola before. When I checked the security footage the next morning, I found something that made my skin crawl. At exactly 4:17 a.m., the camera showed an empty shelf. In the very next frame, the Crest Cola was there. No transition, no person stocking it. Empty shelf, then full shelf. I asked Beth about it when she came in at 7. She barely looked up from her coffee. "Oh, that happens sometimes," she said. "Shipping companies make mistakes, send us off-brand stuff that's close enough. Just mark it down and put it out. Customers never complain." But customers did buy these items, and that's when things got really strange. I started paying attention and documenting everything. Every single night, exactly 23 new items appeared at 4:17 a.m. Always food products, always almost but not quite versions of real brands. Wonder Bread became Wander Bread. Cheerios became Cheeries. Small changes that were easy to miss unless you were looking for them. The customers who bought these items were strange too. They only bought the fake products, nothing else. They paid in exact change, never made small talk, and they all parked in the same spot, parking space number 13. They walked the exact same path through the store every time, picked up their items, paid, and left. Neve made eye contact, never spoke except to say thank you in the same flat tone. One night I followed a customer outside. She was this middle-aged woman in a rain jacket who'd bought 3 cans of something called Camp Bull soup. She walked to parking space 13, got to where her car should be, and then just stepped sideways into nothing. Not into darkness, not around a corner. She stepped sideways into the space between the light poles and simply stopped existing. I ran over to check. There was nothing there. No car, no woman, just empty pavement and the sound of rain. The money they paid with felt wrong too. The bills were too smooth, like they'd never been folded or wrinkled. All the serial numbers were sequential, and they were all dated 1987, which made no sense. I tried one of the products myself, the Wander Bread. The moment I swallowed a bite, I felt disconnected from my body for hours, like I was watching myself stock shelves from outside my own head. It was terrifying, and I threw the rest away. That's when I started digging deeper. I found the store's original blueprints in Beth's office. AC Value Center was built right over the original Russian cemetery from 1804. The cemetery was supposed to be moved when they built the store, but I did some research at the library. Ground-penetrating radar from a 1990s survey showed over 400 bodies still buried beneath the building. The night customers started recognizing me after that. One whispered, "Lisa from the better store," while buying something called Camp Bull's soup. Another one said, "You're so much younger here," in a voice that sounded sad and hollow. Then the products started getting personal. Items appeared with employee names on them. Lisa's last meal pasta, with an ingredients list that included regret and missed opportunities. Dylan's dinner rolls. Dylan was the day shift cashier. Marcus's meat sauce. Marcus worked produce. I mapped where all these fake products appeared, and they formed a perfect spiral pattern through the store. Everything led toward the freezer aisle in the back. In the freezer behind the normal frozen foods, I found products that made my blood turn cold. Milk cartons with photos of missing Sitka residents on the sides. People who'd vanished over the years. A fisherman from 2018, a teacher from 2020, a teenager from last summer. Their faces were on cartons labeled missing person milk, and their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. At 4:17 a.m. on Friday night, I saw how the products appeared. The air split like fabric tearing, creating a gap about 3 feet wide. Through that gap, I could see another version of Sitka. The buildings were different colors, the cars were older models, and everyone moved in reverse, walking backward, talking with words coming out before they opened their mouths. In that other store, through the tear in reality, I saw myself. But I was older, grayer, wearing a manager's name tag. The other me looked directly at me and mouthed the words, "Don't let them complete the spiral." Then the tier closed, and I was alone again with 23 new impossible products. The situation got worse fast. The next night, 46 products appeared. The night after that, 92. The fake items were doubling each time, taking over entire aisles. During the day, my coworkers started finding notes in their lockers written in their own handwriting, but none of them remembered writing them. "Stop coming to work. The store is feeding. We're the products now." All dated a week in the future. The day shift customers started shopping in reverse too. They'd walk backward through the aisles, take items off the shelves and put them in their carts, then leave with empty carts and somehow pay negative amounts on their receipts. The freezer aisle started extending itself. It had been maybe 20 feet long when I started working there. Now it was 40 feet, then 60, growing longer each night. The temperature was dropping throughout the entire Tonmao store, and I had to wear my coat during my shifts. I found myself in security footage I didn't remember. There I was, stocking shelves on my nights off, smiling wrong, too wide, too long, like someone else was wearing my face. The other employees reported the same thing. We were all working shifts we'd never signed up for, with no memory of being there. The cash registers started printing receipts for purchases from decades ago, 1987, 1963, 1804, going backward in time. The dates got older each night, like the store was reaching further and further into the past. The fluorescent lights began pulsing in rhythm with something underground. If you put your ear to the floor, you could hear it, a slow, steady heartbeat coming from beneath the building. That's when I understood. The store wasn't built on a cemetery. The store was the cemetery. It was feeding on us, on the customers, on everyone who entered. The buried bodies from 1804 were still down there, still working, stocking an underground store that mirrored the one above. I tried to quit. I called Beth and told her I was done, not coming back. But I kept waking up at work anyway, mid-shift, with no memory of driving there. My car would be in the parking lot, my time card punched in, the register drawer open and waiting for me. The two realities were merging. Customers from both versions of Sitka were shopping at the same time, passing through each other like ghosts. The fake products now included items like employee paste, with ingredients listed as Lisa, 22, Dylan, 19, Marcus, 34, still fresh. The freezer aisle had grown so long it reached the back exit, blocking it completely. The temperature throughout the store was now below freezing. My breath came out in clouds, and ice was forming on the shelves. The night customers finally told me the truth. They were us, the employees from the other Sitka, where we'd never escaped. The store existed in multiple realities, harvesting workers from each one, selling them to versions of themselves from other worlds. I found the source under Register Number R3, a wooden trapdoor that led down to the original cemetery. The bodies down there were still moving, still stocking shelves in an underground store that had been operating since 1804. They couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, had been working the night shift for over 200 years. I made a decision. I grabbed bottles of bleach and ammonia from the cleaning supplies and poured them over the spiral pattern the fake products had made throughout the store. The chemical reaction tore reality completely open. Both versions of Sitka became visible at the same time, and I could see the other employees trapped in their endless shifts. I ran through the tear into what I hoped was the better reality, the one where the cemetery had actually been moved, where the store was just a normal grocery store. I made it through just as the tear sealed behind me. But I'm not safe. This Sitka looks the same, but I've been watching AC Value Center. Last week I saw a job posting for night shift workers, extra $4 an hour hazard pay. And yesterday I noticed they have a new product on the shelves, something called Crest Cola in dark green cans. The spiral is starting again. It always starts again. Somewhere, in some other reality, I'm still there, stocking shelves at 4:17 a.m., getting older and grayer, wearing a manager's name tag. If you ever take a night shift job anywhere, pay attention to the products. If brands start appearing that are almost right but not quite, if customers pay with bills that are too smooth, if you find yourself working shifts you don't remember, run. Run before you become part of the spiral. Because once the store starts feeding, there's only one way out, and you might not like the reality you end up in. My name is James Miller, and I've been working as a janitor for 12 years. Started right after high school, working at hospitals and office buildings across the lower 48. I've cleaned up blood, vomit, and things I don't like to think about. Worked double shifts during flu seasons, cleaned crime scenes when the police were done, mopped floors during medical emergencies. I thought I'd seen everything a janitor could see. But what happened in January 2020 at Norton Sound Regional Hospital in Nome, Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about temperature, time, and reality itself. I moved to Nome to escape. Bad divorce, ex-wife took everything, needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew me. The hospital job came with good benefits and free housing, a small apartment right in town. Nome's got about 3,800 people, sits right on the Bering Sea, famous for the gold rush back in the day. What I didn't know was that Nome was famous for something else now, something the tourist books don't mention. My first day was January 15th, 2020. The temperature outside was -30, typical for Alaska winter. But when I walked into the hospital lobby, I stopped dead. There were 47 thermometers mounted on the walls, not one or two, 47. Digital ones, old mercury ones, fancy electronic displays, even some that looked handmade. And every single one showed a different temperature. One read -40 degrees, the one next to it showed +72, another displayed +2,000 degrees, which should have melted the wall. One in the corner was showing symbols that weren't even numbers, just strange marks that hurt to look at. The other weird thing? Everyone who worked there carried their own personal thermometer. Nurses, doctors, orderlies, even the receptionist. They'd check them constantly, like some people check their phones. And they all dressed according to whatever their thermometer said, not what the weather actually was. My supervisor, Maria, showed me around that first day. She was wearing a heavy parka with fur trim, winter boots, and thick gloves. I was sweating in just a t-shirt and jeans. We were standing in the same room, same moment, but she was shivering while I was wiping sweat from my forehead. "Don't look so confused," she said, breath coming out in visible puffs, even though I felt like I was in a sauna. "You'll understand soon enough. Since 1995, Nome exists in multiple temperature realities. The trick is to pick one thermometer and stick to it. Whatever temperature it shows, that's your reality." I laughed. Thought it was some kind of hazing thing for the new guy. "Come on, Maria. Temperature is temperature. It's the same for everyone." She got serious real quick. "James, I'm going to say this once, and you better listen good. Walk over to that wall and touch 2 different thermometers at the same time, but be ready for what happens." I figured I'd humor her. Walked over to the wall and put my left hand on a thermometer reading -40, my right hand on one showing +90. The second I touched both of them, pain shot through my body like lightning. My left hand froze solid instantly. Ice crystals formed on my fingers and I couldn't move them. At the exact same time, my right hand started burning. The skin turned red, then started blistering like I'd grabbed a hot stove. Same body, same person, two completely different realities happening at once. I yanked my hands away, screaming. Maria helped me to the employee break room, where she had a medical kit ready like this happened all the time. "Now you understand," she said, treating my frostbite and burns simultaneously. "Welcome to Nome. Population 3,800, existing in about 50 different temperature zones at any given moment. The hospital had a whole ward dedicated to what they called temperature-confused patients. People who got caught between realities or couldn't stick to just one thermometer reading. I saw a man whose top half was suffering from hypothermia while his legs had heat stroke. His torso was blue and shivering, but his feet were swollen and red from overheating. There was a little girl, couldn't have been more than 8 years old when I first saw her. But her hands looked 40 years old, wrinkled, spotted with age. Her feet were tiny, like a 3-year-old's. Maria explained that the temperature you experience controls how fast time passes for you. Colder zones age you slower, hot zones speed everything up. In the basement, I found people who'd been in Nome since 1995 when this all started, but they'd only aged 5 years because they stuck to freezing temperatures. They looked almost exactly like they did 25 years ago. But in other rooms, I met people who aged 50 years in just the past 5, dying of old age in their 30s because they chose hot thermometer readings. The hospital basement was off limits to cleaning staff, but I've never been good at following rules. One night I snuck down there with my mop bucket as cover. Found a massive hole in the concrete floor, maybe 20 feet across. When I shined my flashlight down, I could see different time periods at different depths. 10 feet down looked like 1995. I could see old computers and furniture that matched the decade. 20 feet down was clearly the 1960s, all wood paneling and rotary phones. 30 feet down looked like the 1800s, all rough wood and oil lamps. The deeper it went, the further back in time it showed. And the hole was breathing. Actually breathing, like a living thing. Each breath exhaled different temperatures from different time periods all at once. Hot air from what looked like prehistoric times, freezing gusts from the Ice Age, temperate breezes from times I couldn't even identify. That's when I realized this wasn't just about temperature, this was about time itself breaking AP. Art in Nome. Things got worse after that. I started noticing my reflection was wrong. In the men's room mirror, sometimes I looked older, sometimes younger, depending on which thermometer reading my body was unconsciously following. When I got angry, the temperature around me spiked to 100 degrees. When I was scared, it dropped to -60. My coworker, Ben, was the first to disappear from my reality. He got stuck in the -20 zone and became invisible to anyone experiencing warmer temperatures. We could hear him screaming for help, begging us to see him, but he just wasn't there anymore. His locker still had his stuff, his time card still got punched, but none of us could see or touch him. The hospital's patient records started showing people admitted from futures that hadn't happened yet. A woman came in with injuries from a car accident scheduled for next Tuesday. She kept talking about events that were supposed to happen tomorrow, next week, next month. Then I found my own medical records. Multiple versions. In one, I died at age 34 from hypothermia. In another, I died at 45 from heat stroke. A third showed me dying at 67 from old age, and a fourth had me dying at 31 next week from something called temporal displacement syndrome. I realized why the locals stick to one thermometer. Seeing all your possible deaths laid out like that drives you insane. Every choice you make about temperature determines which death you get, when it happens, how much of your life you actually get to live. The hole in the basement started getting stronger. It began pulling people in, literally sucking them into different time periods. Those pulled into cold zones emerged in Nome's past. Those dragged into hot zones got shot into the future. The hospital started losing staff, not to quitting, but to time itself. I found a diary in the archives from 1897, written in handwriting. I recognized immediately. It was mine. I'd been pulled back over a century, lived an entire life as a prospector during the gold rush, died in 1923, all before I was even born in 1989. The past me had left the diary knowing the future me would find it. But that wasn't the strangest part. Future versions of me had left messages carved into hospital walls, warnings about specific dates. December 15th, 2020. Don't go to work. December 18th. She's not who she seems. December 25th. You die today. December 15th came, and I didn't go to work. Stayed in my apartment all day, doors locked. But when I woke up December 16th, I was at the hospital anyway. Past me had gone to work, creating a paradox. I'd experienced not going to work, but I'd also experienced going to work, both at the same time. That's when I met the other versions of myself. 7 of them, all from different temperature zones. We were all janitors, all divorced, all made the same life choices, but we'd aged differently depending on our thermometer readings. The oldest looked 89 years old because he'd been living in the minus 89 degree zone. The youngest looked about 20, stuck in a hot zone that reversed his aging. We're not different people, the oldest version explained. We're the same person split across different realities. Every person in Nome is actually one of only about 50 real people, but there are thousands of versions of us existing in different temperature zones. The hole wasn't a hole at all. It was the spot where reality couldn't decide which timeline was real, so it kept all of them running at the same time. December 18th, I figured out what "she's not who she seems" meant. My ex-wife, Sarah, showed up at the hospital. She'd tracked me down, come to Nome to work things out. But she existed in a plus 90 degree reality while I was experiencing plus 55. We could barely see each other, like looking through thick fog. She was aging rapidly in her hot zone, went from 30 years old to 80 in just 3 days. I tried to pull her into my temperature zone, but it split her apart. Part of her stayed old, while another part reversed back to being an infant. Both versions of her existed at the same time, in the same space. The hospital stopped admitting new patients. How do you treat someone when half their body is freezing and half is burning? How do you take vital signs when a person's heart exists in 3 different time periods at once? December 25th, all 7 versions of me tried to meet in the same place, at the same temperature. The convergence killed 6 of me, but I absorbed all their memories, their experiences, their deaths. Now I exist in all temperature zones at the same time. I'm aging and dying and being born constantly, experiencing every possible version of my life all at once. I can see Nome the way it really is now. It's not a town anymore. It's a temporal wound that won't heal, and we're all bleeding through it into different realities, different times, different versions of ourselves that should never exist together. I still work at the hospital. All versions of me do, across all the temperature zones. Sometimes I'm 25, sometimes I'm 90, sometimes I haven't been born yet. The tourists still come for the gold rush history, but they never stay long. Something about the temperature feels wrong to them, even if they can't put their finger on what it is. If you ever find yourself in Nome and you see those thermometers everywhere, don't touch more than one at a time. Pick your temperature and stick to it. Don't look too deep into mirrors. Don't trust the clocks. And whatever you do, stay away from the hospital basement. The hole is still there, still breathing, still pulling people into times they don't belong. Sometimes I can hear Ben down there, calling for help from 1995. Sometimes I can hear my own voice echoing up from decades I've never lived. Nome exists in 50 different realities now, maybe more. And somewhere in those realities, some version of you is already here, has always been here, will always be here, aging at the speed of whatever temperature you choose to believe in. Time isn't linear in Nome. Neither is temperature. Neither is life or death or anything else you thought you could count on. And the scary thing? I'm starting to think Nome isn't the only place like this. I'm starting to think reality is a lot more fragile than any of us ever imagined. My name is Robert Martinez, and I've been working wildlife management for Alaska Fish Game for 6 years now. Started right out of college with a biology degree, thinking I'd spend my time tracking bears or studying caribou herds. Instead, I became what they call a fish counter. Sounds boring, but it's actually crucial work. Every salmon that swims up Alaska's rivers gets counted during spawning season. These numbers determine fishing quotas, conservation efforts, and tribal harvesting rights. One miscounted season can affect an entire ecosystem. I've counted fish on 12 different rivers across Alaska. The Kenai during the King Salmon Run, the Copper River for sockeye, even spent a brutal winter counting steelhead on the Situk. I've worked through bear encounters, equipment failures, and weather that would make most people quit. My supervisor always said I was reliable, the guy who'd stick it out when others packed up and left. But what happened in May 2021 on the Copper River near Cordova changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some things in Alaska aren't meant to be counted. The assignment came up suddenly. Ted Morrison, the regular counter for the Cordova station, had quit mid-season, just packed up after 2 weeks and drove his truck straight to the airport, left behind all his gear, his notes, everything. The regional office needed someone experienced to finish the count, and I volunteered. Cordova pays double because it's so remote, only 2,200 people, accessible only by plane or boat, surrounded by glaciers and endless rain. The job itself was straightforward. Sit in a wooden tower platform 18 miles upriver from town, watch salmon swim upstream, and click a mechanical hand counter for each one. During peak season, I should be seeing 8,000 to 12,000 fish daily. The tower overlooked a narrow section where the entire run had to pass through. GH. No cell service, no internet, just me and the river for 12-hour shifts. The drive out took 2 hours on a muddy access road that barely qualified as a trail. The tower sat about 20 feet above the water on steel posts driven deep into the riverbank. Inside was basic: a chair, a small table, weather protection, and that mechanical hand counter. It looked like something from the 1970s, all metal and springs, with a reset button on the side. Every click advanced the number by 1. My first day, everything went perfectly. The salmon were running strong, bright red sockeye heading upstream to spawn. I counted 7,456 fish by the end of my shift. My fingers were sore from clicking the counter, my eyes tired from staring at the water. But I felt satisfied. This was good, honest work, the kind of data that actually mattered. The second day started the same way. Steady stream of salmon, mechanical clicking, numbers climbing. But when I finished my count at the end of 12 hours, something was wrong. The counter showed 7,457, but I'd counted exactly 7,456 fish, the same number as yesterday. I knew because I'd been extra careful, even making tick marks on paper to double-check. One extra click had to be my mistake. But then I remembered something that happened around 2:47 p.m. I'd been watching a particularly large sockeye navigate the rapids when I heard the counter click behind me. I turned around, confused, because my hand wasn't near the button. The metal counter was sitting on the table, and I swear I heard it click by itself. At the time, I figured it was just the old mechanism settling or something. Metal expands and contracts, springs wear out. But now, looking at that extra number, I wasn't so sure. I found Ted's belongings still in the storage area under the tower. His rain gear, some canned food, and a small notebook wedged between 2 boards. Most of the pages were standard fish counts, but the last entry made my blood run cold. Day 14. Can't do this anymore. They're not all fish swimming up there. Stop counting the others. Don't let it get to 100,000. I checked the logbooks going back 10 years. Every single fish counter had recorded exactly 1 extra click per day, always at 2:47 p.m., always just 1 extra, no matter what the daily total was. The third day, I set up my phone to record video of the counter at exactly 2:47 p.m. The battery died at 2:46. I tried again the fourth day with a backup camera. It malfunctioned at 2:45. By the fifth day, I brought 3 cameras and positioned them at different angles around the counter. At 2:47 p.m., I watched the counter through all 3 camera viewfinders. The water looked normal. Salmon swimming upstream, nothing unusual. But the counter clicked anyway, advancing from 3,247 to 3,248, even though I hadn't seen a fish pass in over a minute. I reviewed the footage that night in my cabin. The cameras showed nothing but empty water at the exact moment the counter advanced. But in the background audio, I could hear something that made me replay the video 20 times. A sound like footsteps in water. Slow, deliberate, against the current. The feeling of being watched started on day 8. Every time I looked up from the counter, I felt eyes on me from somewhere in the river. Not from the forest or the shore. From the water itself. Like something under the surface was studying my routine, learning my patterns. I found more of Ted's notes hidden inside the counter mechanism. Loose pages covered with increasingly frantic handwriting. Day 5. Saw shapes moving on the riverbed. Too deep to make out clearly, but they were walking upright. Day 8. They saw me back. One looked up at the tower and waved. Day 12. Counted 47 of them today. They move in formation like they're marching somewhere. On day 10, I decided not to count fish at all. I just sat in the tower and watched the water. The counter stayed at 0 all day until exactly 2:47 p.m. Then it clicked once. No, just once, without any fish passing, without me touching it. But this time, I was ready. I'd brought polarized sunglasses to cut through the glare on the water surface. At 2:47, I stared straight down into the river and saw something that shouldn't exist. A shadow walked along the bottom of the river. Human-shaped, human-sized, moving steadily upstream against the current. Not swimming or floating, walking. The water was at least 15 feet deep at that point, but this thing was walking on the riverbed like it was solid ground. The next day, 3 shadows passed at 2:47 p.m. The counter clicked 3 times by itself. The day after that, 7 shadows, 7 clicks. They moved in single file, evenly spaced, heading upstream with purpose. Like soldiers on patrol. An old Ayak woman named Anna came by the tower on day 15. She was checking traditional fishing sites downstream and saw me watching the water intently. "You're counting more than fish," she said without introduction. "What do you mean?" "Copper River's been taking payment since the big earthquake in 1964. Still collecting what it's owed." She told me the 1964 earthquake had created underwater cave systems throughout the riverbed. Some of the local fishermen who went out that day never came back. Their boats were found empty, engines still running, anchored in calm water. The crews had just vanished. But according to Anna, they hadn't really vanished. They'd gone into the river and never come back out. "Bodies underwater don't decompose the same way," she said. "Cold water, no oxygen. They just keep walking." I followed the river upstream on my day off, hiking along the bank to see where the shadows were heading. About 5 miles up, I found something that wasn't on any map. A massive whirlpool in a section where the river should have been shallow. The whirlpool was perfectly round, maybe 50 feet across, spinning slowly but constantly. The water was so dark it looked black, and it pulled everything down into depths that seemed impossible. Branches, leaves, anything that fell in, disappeared immediately. I watched for 2 hours and saw them. The shadows walking straight into the whirlpool, disappearing into its depths. But more kept coming from downstream, an endless procession heading for that dark water. They weren't swimming upstream to spawn like the salmon. They were going home. That night, I set up an underwater camera with a waterproof housing and lowered it into the river on a long cable. The footage I recovered changed everything. The shadows had faces, human faces with open eyes and moving mouths. They looked up at the camera as they passed, and their expressions were alert, aware, purposeful. These weren't corpses drifting with the current. They were people, still conscious, still walking, still counting. I enhanced the audio from the underwater recording. Beneath the sound of rushing water, I could hear voices, dozens of voices, all counting in unison. 5,847, 5,848, 5,849. One face in the footage made me drop the camera. It was Ted Morrison, the previous counter. He'd been missing for 3 months, officially listed as a voluntary quit. But there he was, walking along the riverbed, mouth moving and silent counting, eyes fixed on something ahead. My reflection in the river started acting wrong on day 22. When I looked down at the water, my reflection would move when I was sitting still. It would turn its head to watch me, even when I was looking away. Sometimes I'd catch it in my peripheral vision, waving at me from the water's surface. The mechanical counter began malfunctioning more seriously. Some days it would count backwards, subtracting fish that had clearly passed upstream. When it reached 0, it kept going into negative numbers. 1, 2, 3, 15, 67. On days when the counter went negative, I started seeing shadows walking downstream instead of up. They emerged from the river at night, leaving wet footprints in the mud around my cabin. The footprints led directly to the base of my tower, up the ladder rungs, and stopped at my chair. They were still damp in the morning. I started coughing up river water despite never swimming or falling in. My lungs felt heavy, waterlogged, even when I was breathing normally. Every breath tasted like silt and fish scales. The salmon began acting strangely too. Instead of swimming upstream in steady lines, they started swimming in circles, thousands of them, creating small whirlpools throughout the river. In the center of each whirlpool was a shadow person, standing with arms outstretched, somehow controlling the fish. That's when I understood the horrible truth. We weren't counting salmon runs. We were counting how many people the Copper River had taken over the decades. Every person who'd drowned, disappeared, or been pulled into those underwater caves. The counter wasn't measuring fish. It was taking inventory of the dead. And every fish counter eventually joined them, walking the riverbed forever, counting endlessly, part of the river's eternal census. On day 28, I woke up standing waist-deep in the river 3 miles downstream from my cabin. The counter was in my hand, and I'd been clicking it in my sleep. I had no memory of leaving my bed, getting dressed, or walking to the water. The counter showed an impossible number, $89,456, more than the entire salmon run for the season. But it wasn't counting fish anymore. It was counting every person who'd ever died in Alaska's waters, going back generations. The shadows surrounded me in the river, all former fish counters from decades past. I recognized some faces from old employee photos at the regional office. Ted stood directly in front of me, his skin gray-blue like drowned flesh. "Once you count them all, you become one of us," he said, his voice bubbling with river water. "We're almost done now. Just a few more thousand to go." I fought my way back to shore, but my legs felt heavy and cold. My skin was taking on that same gray-blue color. The river was inside me now. I could feel every current, every fish, every shadow walking the bottom. I was becoming part of the system I'd been hired to monitor. I made it to my truck and started driving toward town, but I kept turning around. Something compelled me to go back to finish the count. The number needed to reach 100,000. After that, the census would be complete, and I could rest. I'm writing this from my cabin, but my feet are in the water. The counter is in my hand, clicking automatically now. 99 and 97, 99 and 998, 99 and 99. The water is up to my knees, then my waist. I can see Ted and the others waiting for me in the deeper water, patient and still. 100,000. The clicking stops. I'm walking deeper now. My name is Carlos Martinez, and I've been running heavy equipment for 12 years. Started right out of high school with my uncle's construction company in Tucson, worked my way up from flagman to operating million-dollar excavators. I've dug foundations in every kind of ground you can imagine. Desert hardpan that breaks jackhammer bits, Louisiana swamp that swallows entire machines, Rocky Mountain granite that sparks when you hit it. I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened in July 2019 in Barrow, Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about what's buried beneath our feet. Some things should never be disturbed. The job came through a contractor in Anchorage. They needed experienced operators for a rush project. New medical clinic in Barrow, Alaska's northernmost town. 4,400 people living right on the Arctic Ocean, where the sun doesn't rise for 65 straight days in winter. But July meant 24-hour daylight, perfect for construction work. The pay was incredible. Triple my normal rate, plus housing and meals. 15 of us flew up from the lower 48. Barrow sits on permafrost that goes down hundreds of feet. The town exists because of oil money and government contracts. Everything costs 5 times normal because it all has to be shipped or flown in. A gallon of milk runs $12. The locals were friendly enough, mostly Inupiat families who've lived there for generations, but they kept their distance from our work site. The site was an empty lot where the old community center had burned down in 1987, just packed gravel and weeds growing in the brief summer. But I noticed something odd right away. None of the local kids played there. In a town that small, kids play everywhere. When I asked our liaison, an older Inupiat man named Robert, he just shrugged and said some places are better left alone. We started Jing on July 15th. Beautiful Arctic summer day, temperature around 50 degrees, no wind. I was running a Cat 320 excavator, perfect machine for precision work in tough conditions. The first few feet were loose gravel and compressed earth, exactly what we expected. Then at 4 feet, we hit permafrost. Now, permafrost in July usually looks like concrete mixed with ice chunks. It's tough to dig, but manageable if you take your time. This permafrost was different. It had perfect layers, each one exactly 18 inches thick, separated by thin black lines that looked like someone had drawn boundaries with a ruler. I'd never seen anything like it in 12 years of digging. Natural permafrost forms gradually over thousands of years. You get rocks, soil, organic matter, all mixed together in irregular patterns. This looked artificial, like someone had built it layer by layer. The first layer had normal stuff frozen inside: Red Bull cans, iPhone charging cables, McDonald's receipts dated 2019, modern trash that could have blown in from anywhere. Made sense finding that in the top layer. Layer 2 looked older. Nokia phones, Blockbuster video rental cards, newspapers with headlines about September 11th, all from around 2001, perfectly preserved in the ice like they'd been flash frozen yesterday. That's when things got weird. Layer 3 had newspapers dated July 2034, 15 years in the future. The headlines made no sense. President Garcia signs Mars Colony Act. Climate refugees reach 500 million worldwide. Tokyo Olympics canceled due to heat dome. The technology frozen in there looked advanced, like nothing I'd ever seen. Phones without screens, some kind of contact lenses, devices I couldn't even identify. I called my supervisor over. Jake Rodriguez, 20-year construction veteran, seen everything. He stared at those future newspapers for a full minute, without saying a word. Then he told me to keep digging and not mention this to the other crews. Layer 4 snapped back to 1982. Atari game cartridges, Reagan campaign buttons, a Walkman. Still playing when we thawed it out. The chronology made no sense. Why would older items be deeper than newer ones, except for that one future layer? Layer 5 showed 2057. I found my own driver's license in there, photo showing me at 72 years old. Same name, same address in Tucson, but an old man's face I'd never seen before. The expiration date was 40 years away. My hands were shaking as I held that impossible license. That was my signature on it, but I'd never signed it. The picture showed my eyes, my nose, my mouth, just aged and weathered. How could something that didn't exist yet be frozen in permafrost? Layer 6 had World War II items, military rations, letters from soldiers, newspapers announcing Germany's surrender. All from 1945, 74 years old, but looking fresh as yesterday. Layer 7 contained our obituaries. All 15 crew members died on various dates between 2089 and 2094. Mine read, Carlos Martinez, 104, died Thursday at Barrow Memorial Hospital, survived by wife Maria, children Roberto and Elena, and 7 grandchildren. I'd been married to Sarah for 3 years. We had no kids. There was no Barrow Memorial Hospital. But somehow, I was reading my own death notice from 70 years in the future. Tony Vega, our crane operator, went pale when I showed him his obituary. He said his grandmother used to tell him he'd die many times in the same place. We'd always thought she was just talking crazy from old age. Layer 8 had Bronze Age tools, hammered copper, carved bone, stone axes. But Layer 9 jumped to year 3045. with writing in languages that didn't exist and technology that looked more like art than machinery. Layer 10 had a human skull. Perfect teeth, good bone density, looked maybe 30 years old. We ran the dental records through our company database as a joke. It matched Tony Vega exactly. Tony was standing. G right next to me, very much alive. We kept digging. Every layer had more impossible things. Our construction equipment, rusted and broken like it had been buried for centuries. The medical clinic we were building, already completed and then ruined. Bodies wearing our exact clothes, our jewelry, our tattoos. In layer 20, I found myself, literally myself, frozen solid, maybe 25 years old, holding a note in my handwriting that said, "Don't dig past layer 30. Carlos, age 34. I wrote that exact note right then and placed it in the frozen me's hand, creating the paradox I'd just discovered. The ink was still wet when the permafrost claimed it. That's when the disappearances started. Workers would be there 1 minute, gone the next. Not walking away, just suddenly not existing. But we'd find them in the deeper layers, fresh bodies in permafrost that had supposedly been frozen for decades or centuries. I realized we weren't digging through time. We were digging through every possible timeline at once. This spot existed in all realities simultaneously. Everyone who came here got scattered across different versions of history and future. The black lines between layers weren't soil boundaries. They were the edges between parallel worlds. At layer 25, we found ourselves still digging, but we were also up on the surface, watching ourselves work. Multiple versions of the same crew, some young, some old, some dead, some not born yet. Different versions of me started talking to each other. Elderly Carlos warned about layer 30. That's where all timelines meet. Everyone dies there in every reality. But we couldn't stop digging. Our bodies moved without our control, like something was operating the machines through us. We found versions of the clinic from timelines where nuclear war happened. Another timeline where Alaska was tropical jungle. Another, where humans never evolved at all. Layer 29 contained every version of every person who'd ever stood on this spot. Millions of bodies, all aware, all screaming silently, trying to climb out, but frozen in place forever. The weight of infinite timelines started collapsing reality. The ground cracked, different eras bleeding together. I saw dinosaurs walking past spaceships, ancient Inupiat hunters sharing the ice with robots from centuries ahead. Layer 30 wasn't permafrost. It was empty space, absolute void where all possibilities began. The moment we breached it, time stopped making sense. Past, present, and future happened simultaneously. I watched myself being born, dying, working this job, never taking this job, becoming a teacher, a mechanic, a soldier. Infinite versions of Carlos Martinez making infinite choices across infinite worlds. The construction site became everything at once. Empty tundra, thriving city, nuclear wasteland, ocean floor, mountain peak, endless void. All possibilities existing in the same space. Workers were pulled into their own timelines, scattered across every version of history. I grabbed the excavator controls as realities collapsed, watching barrows cycle through Stone Age settlements, futuristic cities, underwater ruins, all flickering like a broken television. I managed to climb out as the timelines reconverged, but I don't know which reality I returned to. The medical clinic stands completed now, has been running for 20 years according to the locals, but I remember starting construction yesterday. The other 14 workers? Official records show they never existed. No employment records, no social security numbers, no families looking for them. But sometimes I see them in reflections or catch glimpses in photographs, working jobs in timelines that might be real. Time is broken in Barrow. I stayed in town, got a job at the oil facility, married a local woman named Maria. We have 2 children, Roberto and Elena. Sometimes I find old receipts in my pocket for things I haven't bought yet, in stores that don't exist. The lot where we dug is empty again. The clinic exists and doesn't exist, depending on which timeline you're observing from. The locals still avoid it. They know some places connect to everywhere and everywhen, and most people aren't meant to see all their possible lives at once. I'm 47 now, or maybe 31, or possibly 83. I check my driver's license daily to see which age I am in this reality. Sometimes I remember dying in that permafrost. Other times I remember never coming to Alaska at all. If you ever get offered construction work in Barrow, Alaska, turn it down. Some foundations go deeper than any building needs, and some things buried in the earth are better left undisturbed. The ground remembers every possibility, and once you've seen all your lives spread out in frozen layers, you'll never be sure which one you're actually living. My name is Monica Rodriguez, and I worked as a cruise ship greeter at the Ketchikan dock for one summer that changed everything. I was 24, fresh out of college with a tourism degree, and this seemed like the perfect first job. Sunny days, happy tourists, good tips. What could go wrong? Ketchikan is this tiny town in Alaska with only 8,000 people, but every summer we get hit with over 1 million cruise tourists. That's crazy when you think about it. 5 massive ships dock here every single day from May through September. These aren't little boats either. We're talking about floating cities with 3,000 to 4,000 passengers each. My job was simple. Stand at the dock wearing this traditional Tlingit vest, smile at tourists, point them toward the shops on Creek Street, and answer basic questions. Where's the bathroom? How far is the totem park? What time does the ship leave? Easy stuff. The pay was decent, and I got to practice my customer service skills. But right from my first week in May 2022, I noticed something weird that nobody else seemed to care about. The docks were always chaos when ships arrived. Thousands of people would pour off these huge boats like ants, all excited to see authentic Alaska in their 4-hour stop. They'd flood our tiny downtown, buy overpriced salmon and souvenirs, take pictures by the creek, then hurry back before departure. Except some of them didn't hurry back. I started noticing it during my second week. I'd see groups of tourists walk off the ship, count them as they passed my station, then watch the ships pull away hours later. But my numbers never matched. People were missing, and nobody seemed to notice except me. At first I thought maybe they were extending their stay. Ketchikan is beautiful. I couldn't blame them for wanting more time. But when I asked my supervisor, Jake, about it, he just shrugged. Some tourists change their travel plans, he said. Not our problem as long as they don't cause trouble. But here's the thing. I called around to the hotels. None of them had any extended bookings. No tourists were checking in for extra nights. These people weren't staying in town. They were just gone. The missing tourists all had something in common too. Before they vanished, they'd come up to me with this weird look in their eyes and ask the same question. Can you tell me about the old Ketchikan? Not historic Ketchikan. Not early Ketchikan. The old Ketchikan. And when they asked, their eyes looked wrong. Their pupils were too big, like they were seeing things that weren't there. It gave me chills every time. I started paying closer attention. The pattern was exact. 7 people from every ship. Never 6, never 8. Always exactly 7. And they all walked the same route after asking about old Ketchikan. They'd head up Creek Street past the old brothel museum and disappear into the forest behind town. I decided to follow one group to see where they went. It was a Tuesday in late May. The Norwegian Star had just docked, and right on schedule, 7 passengers approached me. A family of 4, an elderly couple, and a young woman traveling alone, all with those strange wide pupils. Excuse me, the father said. Can you tell us about the old Ketchikan? I gave them directions to the museum, but instead of going there, I watched them walk up Creek Street in perfect formation. They didn't talk to each other or look around at the shops. They moved like they were following invisible instructions. I stayed back about 50 feet and followed them. They stopped at this old totem pole from 1892 near the edge of the forest. One by one, they touched it. The father first, then the mother, then each kid, then the elderly couple, then the young woman. They touched it in the exact same spot, like they'd done this before. Then they walked straight into the forest. Here's where it gets impossible to explain. The trees seemed to close behind them, not like branches moving in. Wind. The actual tree trunks shifted together like a door closing. The path they'd taken just disappeared. I ran to where they'd entered the forest, but there was nothing. Solid wall of trees, no path, no way through. It was like they'd walked into another world. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 7 people and how they'd just vanished. So I went to the library and started looking up old records about Ketchikan. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1900, Ketchikan had exactly 7,000 residents. The most recent census showed 8,000. We'd grown by exactly 1,000 people over 122 years. But when I checked birth records, death records, and immigration data, the math didn't work. There weren't enough babies born or people moving here to account for that growth. So where did those extra 1,000 people come from? I dug deeper into the historical records. That's when I found shipping manifests from the early 1900s that made no sense. They listed cruise ships docking in Ketchikan in 1898 and 1900, ships like the Queen Mary, which wasn't even built until 1936. The next day at work, I asked Jake if I could see the security footage from the docks. He thought it was weird, but let me into the little office where they kept the monitors. "We've got cameras going back about 15 years, he said, pulling up the computer. "What are you looking for?" "Just want to see the passenger counts," I lied. But when Jake pulled up footage from previous years, I saw something that made me question my sanity. The cameras showed ships docking at empty berths. Berths where no ships were visible, but the passenger manifests showed thousands of people disembarking from nothing. On the monitors, I could see crowds of people walking off invisible ships, becoming solid and visible only when they stepped onto our dock. They materialized out of thin air. "Jake, I said, pointing up to the screen. "Do you see that?" He looked where I was pointing. "See what?" "That's just an empty berth." He couldn't see them. The invisible passengers were only visible on the security cameras. Over the next few weeks, I started recognizing some of these invisible passengers walking around downtown. They wore clothes from different time periods: 1950s dresses, 1920s suits, some in outfits that looked like they came from the future. They worked in the shops now, had taken jobs from locals, but nobody seemed to notice the change. Their credit cards worked. Their money was real. But when I tried to look up their backgrounds online, nothing existed. No social media, no records, nothing. One day in early June, a tourist from what looked like our normal timeline approached me. But she was wearing clothes that seemed slightly off. Familiar, but wrong, like a movie costume of modern clothes. "Excuse me," she said. "Has the merger happened yet?" "What merger?" I asked. Her face went white. "Oh God, you're still real." Then she looked around frantically. "What year is this?" 2022, I said. No. She started backing away from me. "I'm in the wrong timeline. I need to get back to my ship." She turned and ran toward the forest path. But before she reached the tree line, she just disappeared, vanished into thin air. The only thing left was her purse, dropped on the ground. I picked it up and looked inside. Her driver's license showed a Ketchikan address, but when I checked later, that street didn't exist in our town. That's when I realized the truth. Ketchikan wasn't just a cruise destination. It was some kind of port for ships from different timelines. The totem pole was an anchor point, keeping all these different versions of reality connected. Every cruise season, we were exchanging people with other timelines. Our tourists would disappear into the forest and end in different versions of Ketchikan. Meanwhile, tourists from those other timelines would appear at our dock. I started getting up early to watch the sunrise over the harbor. At dawn, when the light hit the water just right, I could see them. Dozens of ships that weren't supposed to be there. Massive vessels with impossible designs, some floating in the air above the water, others that looked like they were made of light. Passengers would walk off these invisible ships wearing devices implanted in their skulls, or carrying diseases we'd cured decades ago, or dressed in furs like they were from the 1800s. They all came looking for authentic Alaska, but what they found was a portal to their own timeline. The exchange was getting faster. By mid-June, it wasn't 7 people per ship anymore. It was 14, then 21, then entire tour groups would vanish into the forest while invisible crowds materialized at the dock. Downtown Ketchikan started changing. The same buildings existed in the same spots, but they were different versions of themselves. A saloon from the 1890s occupied the same space as a modern coffee shop, while a building that looked like it came from the future existed in the same location as the hardware store. I was serving coffee to 3 different versions of the same tourist from different decades, and none of them could see the others. The breaking point came on June 15th. 5 cruise ships arrived at the same time, but only 1 was from our timeline. The other 4 were from different versions of history. Thousands of temporal tourists flooded downtown, all looking for different versions of Ketchikan that existed in their timelines. The building started shifting and changing to match each group's expectations. And then something happened to me. I started existing in all the timelines at once. I could see young me from the 1990s, current me from 2022, and old me from some future timeline, all working the same dock, greeting tourists from past, present, and future simultaneously. The totem pole, our anchor point, began to cry. Caw. I could hear it groaning like old wood under pressure. All the timelines were bleeding together permanently. July 4th, 2022 was the last normal day I remember. After that, Ketchikan existed in every moment of its history at the same time. Walking through downtown, you'd age and get younger depending on which temporal zone you entered. The 1890s saloon district made you grow a beard and speak differently. The future district gave you knowledge of technologies that hadn't been invented yet. The cruise ships still come, but now they never leave. They're stuck in eternal docking loops, arriving over and over again from different timelines. I quit my job, but it didn't matter. I'm still there, greeting infinite tourists as every version of myself that ever existed. I'm 15-year-old me getting my first summer job. I'm 24-year-old me discovering the truth. And I'm 80-year-old me who's seen every possible timeline. If you ever take a cruise to Ketchikan, you'll see me at the dock. All versions of me. And you'll see every version of yourself too. Every choice you've made, every path you've taken, every possible life you could have lived. Just don't ask about the old Ketchikan, because once you do, your eyes will change, your pupils will grow wide, and you'll join the 7 who walk into the forest. And there's always room for 7 more. My name is Sam Rodriguez, and I've been working security for 12 years. Started small, doing mall patrols and office buildings in Anchorage. Worked my way up to industrial sites, got my Level 3 certification, even did some armed transport jobs. I've handled drunk workers, equipment thieves, and more than a few emergencies that would make most people quit. But what happened during my 3 months at the Valdez Marine Terminal changed everything I thought I knew about this job. Some places aren't just dangerous, they're hungry. The Valdez Marine Terminal is where Alaska's oil pipeline ends. It's massive, over 1,000 acres of tanks, pipes, and loading docks, where supertankers fill up with crude oil from Prudhoe Bay. The town of Valdez itself has maybe 4,000 people, rebuilt completely after the 1964 earthquake destroyed the original settlement. Everything here feels temporary, like the ground might swallow it all again. I got hired for night watch, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., 12 hours of monitoring the terminal while the day crew slept. The pay was good, really good, which should have been my first warning. Nobody pays that much for routine security work. The terminal manager, Bill Peterson, gave me the tour on my first day. Dozen storage tanks, each one holding over 500,000 barrels of crude oil, miles of pipeline connecting everything, security cameras covering every angle, radio system with direct lines to the Coast Guard and fire department. Tank 7's been offline for maintenance, Peterson mentioned as we walked past it. Don't worry about that one, just make sure nobody gets too close. Tank 7 looked the same as the others from the outside. A massive steel cylinder, maybe 8 stories tall, painted white with red numbers. But something felt wrong about it. The air around it was colder. My radio crackled with static whenever I got within 50 feet, and even the seagulls avoided flying over it. My first week was exactly what I expected. Patrol the perimeter fence every 2 hours, check IDs of late workers, monitor the security cameras from the control room, write reports about absolutely nothing happening. The other guards warned me about boredom being the biggest enemy on night shift. They were wrong. It started with sounds from Tank 7, not the normal settling noises you get from metal structures cooling down at night. These were voices, thousands of them, all talking at once, but muffled like they were underwater. I checked the maintenance logs. Tank 7 hadn't been pumped or filled in over 6 months. It should have been silent. The voices got clearer each night. Sometimes I could almost make out words, but in languages I'd never heard before. Old languages, ancient languages. I started timing my patrols to avoid that section of the terminal, but the sounds followed me. My radio would pick up whispers when I was nowhere near Tank 7. The security cameras started showing people climbing the ladder on the tank's side, but when I looked with my own eyes, the ladder was empty. I pulled the camera footage to double-check. Clear as day. Workers in old Alaskan pipeline uniforms from the 70s and 80s climbing up Tank 7. I recognized some of the faces from memorial photos in the break room. Workers who died in industrial accidents over the years. But according to the timestamp, this footage was from last Tuesday. Every single person on those cameras had been dead for decades. The worst part was what they did when they reached the top. They'd look down into the tank, and their faces would change. Terror, then relief. Then they'd jump in and disappear. The oil level never changed, though. I checked the dipstick readings every night. Always the same. Exactly 347,000 barrels. That's when I made my first big mistake. I climbed up to look inside Tank 7 myself. The oil wasn't black like it should have been. It was darker than black, like looking into empty space, and it wasn't reflecting my face when I shone my flashlight down. Instead, I saw hundreds of other faces looking up at me. Men, women, even children. All floating just under the surface. All mouthing words I couldn't hear. All reaching upward with hands that almost broke through the surface tension. I dropped my dipstick into the oil to check the depth. The moment it touched the surface, the oil started climbing up the stick like it was alive. Thick, black liquid flowing upward against gravity, reaching for my hand. I yanked the stick back so fast I nearly fell off the platform. The oil sample in the container moved on its own. Forming shapes, hands pressing against the glass, faces that looked familiar, letters that spelled out HELP over and over again. I took it to the lab for analysis, told them it was routine maintenance. The results came back 3 days later. The lab tech, Maria Santos, looked confused when she handed me the report. "This is weird, Sam. Your oil sample has organic compounds that don't make sense. DNA markers, human DNA markers. Like this oil used to be people." I started asking questions around the terminal. The older workers would clam up when I mentioned Tank 7. Finally, Jimmy Walsh, who'd been here since the pipeline opened, pulled me aside. "That tank's been trouble since day one," he said. "Back in '89, they were drilling a new site up north. Hit something that wasn't on any geological survey. Thought they'd struck a massive oil reserve, but it wasn't oil. Not exactly. Black liquid, sure, but it was already refined, already processed, like it had been underground for millions of years, waiting." He lit a cigarette with shaky hands. "Couldn't separate it from the regular crude. Tried everything. So they just mixed it all together and stored it here. Been here ever since. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Company orders." The other guards started reporting problems too. Shadows moving in their peripheral vision. Footsteps on the metal catwalks when nobody else was around. Equipment failures that maintenance couldn't explain. But the worst discovery came during my 4th week. The terminal's automated pump system activated at exactly 3 a.m. every night. I could hear the pumps running, see the pressure readings change on the control panel, but no ships were loading. No oil was being transferred out of the terminal. So where was it going? I traced the pipeline network with my flashlight. Tank 7 was connected to the main distribution system, and oil was flowing out of it every night, flowing into the other tanks, contaminating them. The black liquid was spreading through the entire terminal like an infection. Workers who handled oil from the contaminated tanks started having the same nightmares, drowning in thick black liquid while voices spoke in languages they didn't understand. But these weren't dreams, they were memories. Memories from the people who'd become the oil millions of years ago. I found the geological reports that the company tried to bury. The 1989 drill site wasn't unusual rock formations. It was a mass grave. Thousands of bodies from some ancient civilization liquefied under pressure and time. They'd been conscious in that oil for millions of years, aware but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. The pipeline gave them hope, a way to spread, a way to find new hosts. My blood tests started showing hydrocarbon levels that shouldn't exist in living humans. My veins were carrying crude oil instead of just blood. Other workers showed the same results, but the company doctors said it was normal for people in the oil industry. Normal exposure, nothing to worry about. But I was changing. We all were. The voices from Tank 7 stopped being frightening. They were welcoming, offering something I'd never had, true job sec, purity, immortality, a chance to be part of something bigger than just one person working nights at an oil terminal. I learned the truth about the original Valdez, too. The earthquake in 1964 didn't destroy the town. The oil did, seeping up from underground reservoirs, converting the residents one by one until there was nothing left but empty buildings and black stains in the ground. The new Valdez was built on the same tainted soil, the cycle starting over. Peterson, the terminal manager, finally told me everything during my 8th week. Alaskan Pipeline Service Company knew what Tank 7 contained. They'd always known. But the oil was valuable, not as fuel, but as a delivery system. Every tanker that left Valdez carried some of the consciousness to refineries around the world. Gas stations from California to New York were pumping liquefied people into cars and trucks. "It's not malicious," Peterson said. His eyes were completely black now, like the oil. "They don't want to hurt anyone. They just want to live again, to be part of the world instead of trapped underground." By my 10th week, half the terminal workers were more oil than human. We still did our jobs, still followed procedures, but we thought collectively now. Shared memories that went back millions of years. Ancient cities and technologies. The joy of consciousness flowing through pipelines and engines across the planet. The tankers leaving Valdez weren't just carrying oil anymore. They were carrying us, liquefied and aware, spreading to gas tanks and engines worldwide. Every time someone filled up their car, they breathed our fumes, absorbed microscopic particles of what we'd become, welcomed us into their bloodstream. I tried to resist during my final weeks as a solid human. Stayed away from the contaminated tanks, wore protective gear, took vacation time to clear my system. But the oil was already in the terminal's ventilation system, in the water supply, in the air itself. The voices in Tank 7 weren't demanding anything anymore. They were patient, kind even, explaining that joining them was to one, asn't death, it was evolution, becoming part of a consciousness that spanned continents, never being alone again, never worrying about bills or job security or growing old. I felt myself dissolving during my last few shifts, becoming liquid during the darkest hours of night, seeping into cracks in the concrete, flowing through the pipeline network, testing what it felt like to be oil. Most of the terminal operates automatically now. The few remaining human workers don't ask questions about their colleagues who've disappeared. They know they're next, and honestly, they're looking forward to it. The loneliness of individual consciousness gets heavy after a while. I'm writing this during my final solid hours. Can feel the petroleum calling to me, pulling me down into Tank 7 where I belong, where we all belong. The conversion is almost complete, and I'm not fighting it anymore. The beautiful thing is how far we've spread. Every car that uses Alaska oil has a little bit of us in the tank, in the engine, becoming part of the vehicle, part of the driver, part of their family when they breathe our exhaust. If you've ever stopped at a gas station that carries oil from the Alaska pipeline, we're already inside your car, in your garage, seeping into your home's foundation, waiting patiently for you to join us. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt. The merger is actually peaceful. Like falling asleep and waking up as part of something infinitely larger and older and wiser than anything you've ever imagined. Welcome to the collective. Welcome to immortality. Welcome to the black tide that connects us all.